Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. It has been a long time coming for me to have this guy on my show. He and I have connected now for probably close to 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me. I was just telling him why I couldn't believe that I had not had him yet on my show, but he's a speaker. I'm going to let him tell his story, but he's an amazing dad. He's an amazing husband. He travels all over the world, just speaking and pouring into others. And I'm really excited to finally have him on. But my good friend Tyler Dickerhoof has on the show. Welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, Brian, thanks so much, man. As you said, the timeline that we'd known each other, I was like, all right, five. It's like, yeah, just short of five. We got to know each other through the infamous or famous community of Clubhouse
Yes.
during the start of COVID. And I saw the app on my iPad yesterday. I was pulling up Kindle to read a book and I saw the app and I'm like, well, do I need this anymore? But man, so good to be here with you and so good to spend some time with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. Gosh, you said Clubhouse. I'm like, I had to think
Yeah.
for a second. What is
What
Clubhouse?
was
Oh
that?
yeah.
Yeah, that
I
was that
deleted
time.
that app a long time ago. I don't even know if people are still using it, to be honest. I,
Nor do
I'm sh
I.
I'm sure there are, but
I
I
mean, here's
found,
the thing. And I thought about this yesterday. I was mentally thinking about our time together today, and I am so grateful for that time
oh yeah.
and the connections and the people that I've kept in touch with. You think about it, 5 years, you meet somebody randomly online, social media, and it's like, how much do you really engage and stay engaged with them if you don't have personal interactions? And I think about the time that we'd spend during that dead time, right? Like, how can we pour out and connect with people? And it was, Clubhouse that often turned into a lot of Zoom sessions with people. And I think back and like, man, this is one of the lessons that I accounted for, and I believe it. If you pour into a community, if you authentically pour into a community, not to, say, oh, this is what product or service I have to sell to you, but just pour in and engage and add value to people, it's amazing the things that come of it. It really,
Mhm.
it was again, as I was mentally thinking about this today, it was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think for me, when it came to Clubhouse, I social media had there's pros and cons, right? There's good and
Yeah,
bad of social media.
yeah,
And one of the benefits to, especially the podcast, one of the benefits, I mean, you have a podcast, you know this,
yeah,
especially the benefits of this podcast is not only the fact that I get to, have other people on my show that get to pour into people and help them become better parents, but it's the fact that I get to have people on my show and I get to meet them, like virtually
yeah,
meet them, you know what I
totally.
mean? And so
Yes.
my community of people that I have grown to love and enjoy to be around or enjoy to talk to has, I mean, it's thousands, literally
Yeah,
thousands in the 5 years that I've been doing the show. And that has been massive.
yeah,
And I think Clubhouse really helped with that in the
yeah,
beginning. It kind of went
yeah,
sideways a little bit, maybe two
yeah.
years in, it kind of went sideways and people started
I
doing the
wasn't around that long. I
yeah,
mean,
people started doing I wasn't I mean I was watching from afar, you know what I mean, to see
okay.
if maybe it would kind of pick up steam again and go the right
Yeah,
direction. It just seemed like there was random
yeah,
silly meetings and things like that
yeah,
people are doing. I
yeah.
was just like, yeah, it's not
I,
me.
I think it was a such a unique um, timing that it served for the people that engaged in it. Like I was just talking about, served a community for a while. And then, did it reiterate? I don't know. And it's just kind of like, but
Hmm.
there was a time there that, man, it added a lot of value to people. I do believe that. So,
Yeah. No, for sure, for sure. And it
yeah.
exploded fast.
Oh, yeah.
That thing blew up fast.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right. So let's do this before we dive into the stuff we're going to be talking about. I want to know a little bit more about you, maybe my audience, my listeners, my viewers,
Yeah.
who may not know who you are. Let's talk a little
Yeah.
bit about you, kind of how you grew up and how you
Yeah.
got into what you're doing now. And then obviously this is a parenting podcast, so I want to
Yeah.
know about your family as well.
Yeah. So I grew up in Ohio. As a farm kid, I grew up on a dairy farm in Northeast Ohio. From there, moved to New York, saw more snow than I'd ever seen in my life in upstate New York. I went to Cornell University. I got a dairy science degree. So I got a degree where eventually I got into the nutrition space for cows. So I practice as a nutritionist for dairy cows. So imagine like what a dietitian, if you go to a gym, if you go to like a chiropractor, you go to a PT, if they have some type of nutritional services, or even like a professional team, athletics, those things. I did that for cows. So I did that for 13 years living in California, lived in the Central Valley, and worked with clients ranging from Stockton in the Central Valley all the way down to Escondido. So I got to travel the length of the center of the state down. Did that for 8 years in California. Then we moved to Northwest to Spokane. We've been here now just over 15 years. It was a chance to be closer to family. My in-laws had moved here and wanted my kids to be around grandparents, and didn't realize how much I would fall in love with this part of the country. You've spent some time up here, Coeur d'Alene. We have a boat on Coeur d'Alene, and there's not a more magical place to be between, I would say, the middle of June and October. Like
Right.
it is, I've lived in, the four corners, essentially 3.5 of the country. And man, it is exceptional here. Now, like this morning, it's a little overcast. It was rainy all night. You got to put up with some of this. But man, I love the summertime here. So again, that's kind of how I got to where I live now. Part of the journey evolving from doing nutrition for cows was being introduced to network marketing. And I'd always had a passion for fitness. And when I was in college, I asked one of my professors, like, hey, can I take as an elective, like a human nutrition course? And he goes, don't waste your time. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, whatever. And so then going forward, what I realized is that we had to study nutrition for animals so much more than humans because humans didn't care about it. We cared as, raising animals to make sure they're healthy, productive, cost efficient, all those things. So there's a ton of research into it. Well, now we're starting to see where more and more humans have, this desire to be healthier. They see the impact. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm so excited about the new administration, because there's a tremendous emphasis on, I saw the other day, it's like, how can we get out of the illness system that we have is just perpetuate illness. Like, no, let's get healthier. Let's figure out what in our diet is going to help us, all those environmental factors. And so we got involved in that industry, my wife and I, just over 13 years ago, and have loved it. That created a huge network of people throughout the world serving and speaking and interacting with. And part of my way in being involved there, and I was in very much support of my wife, but involved in my expertise that I had to bring. I really started to be intrigued more and more and more in the value of leadership. I had coached starting when I just graduated college. I loved sports growing up. I was a soccer player. I played some other sports, but played soccer the most. And I loved sports. I loved watching sports and the science of sports in regard to why do people perform the way they do. And so
Mhm.
the idea of leadership and can understand that. It's like, oh man, I really love this. And I also was at a place where I realized I was struggling. I was struggling in my relationships. I was struggling at times in my business. And I always just kind of, put it off, whatever. I didn't realize I was the problem.
Hmm.
And so that really brought me into the space of what I'm doing now is the personal development, the self-development, to find a mentor, to find a community that's going to help me grow as a person and kind of overcome some of the barriers I put around me from difficult events when I was a child to trying to always, find value in a world that a lot of worlds didn't fit in. I was a farm kid who loved sports, who went to an Ivy League college that, loved fitness and just other things. And it's like, I don't really fit anywhere. What value do I have to bring? And so ultimately that led me to the podcast I host now, the Impact Driven Leader podcast. the community that I support, my roundtable, the events that I do, the Impact Summit, and as well as you mentioned, speaking. Also, right now, working on my first book. And really, it's this idea I had to overcome my insecurities and realize those were the barriers that were holding me back from being the leader that I could be for myself first, but for others. And so it was really working through that. And then realizing that one of the traumas that I had as a kid, when I
Mm.
was 14, I had a younger brother who died in a farming accident.
Mm.
And what I've recognized from that is the intensity that I went about life came from that moment. And it's
Mm.
probably from moments before that have, a penchant to intensity. I'll just push and drive myself. But it's when I go back to that event and realizing how I responded, that was a very identifiable point when I used intensity to just push me through whatever adversity I had. And I learned in leadership that intensity is a bulldozer. It'll push you through any mountain, but it also leaves carnage. And
Mm.
you will leave people in your wake, and that's no way to lead. And there's a lot of people that rely on intensity to, kind of succeed.
Right.
And what I've seen there is I've really evaluated that myself and evaluating others is at some point they have to pay a hefty price. They have to pay a hefty price because they get to the top of a mountain and realize they don't like where they're at because they don't like the person they are.
Mhm.
They don't like the relationships they have there. And some of the people closest to them, their spouse, their kids, they've just abandoned on their pursuit to climb some mountain and just bulldoze through everything. And that's something that I was fortunate I didn't go to that point where I ruined my marriage and or the relationship with my kids when I was younger, and really understanding that piece of my intensity and insecurity not only affected those four, right? My three kids, my wife, but everyone and
Mhm.
everyone I worked with and all of my previous clients and all of my future clients is like, oh, that was an issue. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, and let's talk about your family a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So three kids. First, my wife, Kelley, we've been married 19 plus years, as she would say. It'll be 20 next year. So we just celebrated our 19th anniversary back in October. Three kids, a daughter who is a senior in high school, a son who's a sophomore in high school, a son who's a freshman in high school. Both boys play football. My youngest also plays basketball. So they just started basketball practice. I think his first game is the 30th, the day after, 2 days after Thanksgiving.
Yep.
My daughter is a dancer. She's a phenomenal dancer, has danced since she was, 18 months old. So 16 and a half years. And she is excited with the opportunity to potentially dance in college. That's her pursuit right now. So, yeah, that's
Awesome.
what's
Well,
going on.
going on 20 years. That's awesome. Congratulations
Yeah.
to you guys. That's
Thank
cool.
you.
Um, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. First, I want to
Sure.
mention you
Yeah.
you're talking about it just kind of brought me back. You're talking about the central coast in California. I mean, that's where I grew up. I grew up in an area called San Luis Obispo, a town called San Luis
Uh-huh.
Obispo. And matter of fact, my parents still live in a town called Atascadero, which is
Oh, yeah.
just shy of just south of Paso Robles,
Yeah.
where
Been through it
the
many times.
where the mini Napa is now, as in Paso Robles.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's where I grew up. That's where I'm from. So it's funny that you mentioned that. I'm like, oh wow. So very cool. I think when it comes to what you had talked about with insecurities, it's interesting that here's what I found interesting about you. You recognized very quickly that the impacts of things that happened when you were younger ultimately led to your insecurities that you dealt with as an adult, and that you had to make a change or find a way to heal yourself or work around it because that was an impact on not only your family, your wife and your children, but also those around you. What dads struggle with in particular is that they don't recognize, I've recognized that myself. I'm a big proponent, a big advocate for therapy,
Mhm.
and I've gone through numerous sessions with my therapist. As a matter of fact, I have a session with my therapist today. I see my therapist regularly to make sure that I'm trying to stay mentally sharp. And I've done
Yeah.
that for years. My wife and I have a marriage coach. She's an actual licensed marriage therapist, but we call her our marriage coach, that we go and see her every other month. And we do that because not that we have problems, so we don't have problems. So I'm
Yeah.
a big advocate for therapy. Anyways, my
Totally.
point is that a lot of men are ego driven. Like you said, they're striving to reach that next goal, or they're striving to make that business work, and they're constantly, on the go, 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 go. And they forget that there may be people that they're hurting. And when they deal
Yeah.
with those insecurities, they come from things that we dealt with in the past. And it took a lot of time in therapy for me to realize that hey, there are some things that I went through as a kid that are a direct reflection of how I act now towards my wife or towards my kids, or the reactions or the ways that I
Yeah.
am towards other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And so for you to recognize that is great. I think dads need to
I
understand that. Go ahead.
yeah, I appreciate you saying quickly. I mean, it wasn't quick. I mean,
Right,
it took
right.
me
No, I
years,
know.
right?
I
And
know.
and I think that's where, I very much appreciate it's like, hey, we all, whether it's a coach, whether it is a therapist, whether it is some type of community that helps guide you, right? We know friends that, have board of directors, right? People around them that are willing to speak into them and say, hey, dude, I just want to let you know this because I love you. Here's the thing that I would say got me to that point. It was my faith.
Mm,
It was leaning into and being willing at a point to say, I can't do this on my own, and God speaking into me. When I was sitting down in the locker room after getting done working out, drinking my protein shake, and at that point, we also owned a gym, and I hear God, I'm a person of faith, and he says, this is how you deal with things. And what that meant is how you deal with things, you just push. You
mm.
just push so hard, they're either going to get out of your way or they're going to just change. And as you and I both know, after many years, people don't change when you push them.
Right.
They absolutely, well, they may go along with it, but they're scheming up, how am I going to get back at you?
Mm,
And I think that was a big learning lesson. Again, faith and God pouring into me, and then seeking mentors to come alongside me and walk with me. And I would say, as I've learned, as I've identified, as I go through it, there's a linchpin to true strength. And I want to just ask you, when you were in the Marine Corps, right?
mhm.
And you were being trained as a Marine, how much did they want you to be a rogue soldier all on your own?
I mean, that's all it was, right? That's all
Okay.
it was.
Yeah. So, well, I guess maybe let me preface that a different way. How much did they want you to just be all out for yourself and not for anyone
Well, you
else?
couldn't do that.
Exactly. And
Right. You couldn't do
that's
that.
more in order to do that, there was a vulnerability that you had to realize I need everyone else to survive.
Right.
They need me to survive. The problem is in our world is we don't have a lot of men particularly, but women as well, that are taught the only way to survive life is by being vulnerable and realize that you need others.
Hmm.
And I think that's the biggest thing to overcome our insecurities is embracing vulnerability. Embracing vulnerability to say, hey, I only see what I see. I can only see the world through my lens. But when I ask you, Bryan, when you look at me, when you listen to me, what do you see and what do you hear? And then I have to stop and I have to acknowledge that. I think it's really important
Hmm.
as dads, that we stop and do that.
Oh,
One of the things that I don't, I don't ever remember. I just don't remember ever my dad apologizing to me.
hmm.
Just like, I don't know if there was incident that it needed to be. There was never this like, oh, he never apologized for that. I'm like, no, we all make mistakes, right? Humans make mistakes. And one of the things that I make sure that I regularly do, if I snap at my kids, if I get upset with them, if I, don't handle things right, man, I got to be humble and vulnerable and say, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that right. And the great thing that I believe in that is that shows them that I'm human and I make mistakes. And at the same point, it begs of them is like, when you make mistakes, just take ownership and be accountable to it. And I think there's a big miss in that. The idea to say thank you and I'm sorry just takes vulnerability. And once you're vulnerable, this is the great thing that I've learned about vulnerability. Let's say, for example, that you were to say some things like, Tyler, I suck at I suck at showing affection to my wife. I know that's not true. I know that's not the case, but say you do that. Well, then all of a sudden, if I were to come at you as like, Bryan, you suck at being a husband because you don't show affection to your wife. You're like, yeah, I already told you that. That's not something you can use against me, right? Like, come on, dude, that's already a known.
Right.
Like if we go to a basketball team, a football team, if we go to a basketball team and, their tallest player is 6'2", and somebody goes like, man, you guys are really short. Yeah, duh. Like we'll still like game plan all around you, especially if they're a really good team that knows how to use that to their advantage. Then, they're going to be exceptional at boxing out. They're going to make sure they do things to use it to their advantage. That a taller team's like, it doesn't mean that vulnerability is your advantage. Actually, it could be your weakness. And I think that's something that to learn and really embrace, that the number one strength we have is our vulnerability. And part of that is I need help. I need a therapist. Why? Not to fix me per se. Maybe that was a part of the work at some point, help me realize what I didn't realize, but to keep me sharp. Like, why do I have a coach? Like to help me understand where, I've lost sight of something, clue that into me. And I think that as a parent, am I a great parent? I don't know. I hope my kids see me as that. But I can't sit here and say that I am. I screw up. I make mistakes. I do things wrong. But I also know that I've regularly said, hey, I'm sorry I did that wrong.
Right. It's needed. And it's interesting that you bring that up. There's a lot of dads that I've coached over the years. And one of the things that when I go through these coaching sessions with these dads, one of the things that I always cover is that it's usually typically in the beginning, like our first meeting or two, I'll tell them, here's what I need you to do. I give them a homework assignment, right? One of their homework assignments every single time that I meet with a dad is one of their homework assignments is they have to go to their kids, regardless of their age, and they have to go to their wife and they have to say, what can I do better as a father? What can I do better as a husband or a dad to our kids? And wait for their response because kids will be honest with you. They will tell you. Now, if you have little kids like 2 years old, 3 years old, and you ask them, they may say, well, you don't give me enough ice cream, or they may say something silly, right? But the more mature ones, the ones that understand the question, really understand the question, will be honest with you. And tell them, I want you to be honest with me because I want to be better as a dad to you. I want to be better as a dad for our kids. So tell me, what can I do better? And it's amazing when you open up that, what you referred to as vulnerability, when you open up those gates, those doors to you as a person, as a husband, as a father, it changes the relationship that you have with your kids at that moment. That moment, that relationship now changes. And so I encourage dads out there and moms too. I encourage you guys to do that with your kids regularly. And I say regularly because as they grow, their phases of life changes, their maturity changes, and so their needs and wants and desires change as they grow. So you need to ask that regularly, but do it, try it, and you should try it too, Tyler. I'm being serious. You should try it too with your kids.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's super important for us to start with that. Number two, you talked about being vulnerable and apologizing, admitting your wrongs, admitting your faults. there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you're right.
Yeah.
Like I said, dads carry these egos on their shoulder. Like I can have, like my dad used to say to me all the time, it's my way or the highway. That was his
Oh
kind of
yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that just doesn't work today. Right.
Well,
So
I
I
don't
think,
think it ever worked
yeah, it just,
because this is my belief. And my wife and I, and this is, I imagine you and Andrea were raised completely different, right? The different circumstances. So would you come together as parents, like you're trying to figure this out? My wife and I were raised completely different. I had parents where I didn't have a curfew in high school. My curfew is you're getting up at 4:30 in the morning to milk cows. And guess
right.
what? You don't stay out very late when that is the option, and that you're getting up at 4:30 on Saturday and you're working all day long. Like you might get done at 7:30, have a lunch break, whatever, but you're working all day. It's not like, oh, okay, I get to go back in bed and sleep. It's like, no. Whereas my wife, it was an iron fist. She one of four girls, and her dad, it was my way or the highway. You don't even voice an opinion, much less ever have one. You only come to me to ask what to do and how to do it. And that's how he lorded over his family. And so that created at least three girls that rebelled and rebelled
Hmm.
and rebelled. My wife moved out when she was 17.
Hmm.
My other ones just more hid things and, just did that. And I looked at, I didn't have anything to rebel against. It was on me. Did I get in trouble? Yeah, I got suspended my freshman year of high school. I got in trouble. I did things, but yet when I got suspended, I can tell you what I was doing those 3 days I got suspended. I was working from 4:30 in the morning until 7:30 at night. It was not fun. I wanted to go back to school to have a break. And I think that's, a piece that you bring up there. It's understanding the difference that we come from. And often we'll either mimic or we'll be the opposite of what we've seen. We rarely end up in the middle.
Right.
And I think the middle is normally where we need to be. Were my parents perfect? No, but if I could find the middle, was my wife's parents perfect? No, but if we could find somewhere in the middle and then we can agree on that. And part of the balance over time, especially between parents, whether they're married or not, when they're not married, it's even harder because, sometimes those communications are difficult. So the thing that gets difficult there is, for example, this has happened to me. I grew up with my dad was a college football player, just this pretty intense, whatever. And there is sometimes a snap, I will overpower. Like, right. I will at some time, my kids like, no, I'm going to overpower. Right. And I have to fight that urge sometimes. And that happens. Right. And, part of like with my wife and I is interacting where she can say, hey, you need to back off. Also with sons, I think there's a little bit of as you have two boys and hey, you're going to have to mess with the old bull because,
Right.
as young bull as you think you are. And sometimes you just need to be put in your place and say, all right, we're not going to have that again. We're not going to fight, but understand sometimes you need your butt kicked. I think that's a very male human, a mammalian thing, right?
Right.
You watch bucks, you watch elk, you watch bulls fight, and the young bulls know, you don't screw with the old bull. Is the old bull mean? Not necessarily, but you just understand your place. All right. And so then I think as well with mothers and moms is that sometimes they'll react in a way, either it's way too comforting, making it too easy. That's not good for kids either. Or in case of one of my wife, sometimes she would react very much like her dad react. I'm going to put the iron fist down. You're going to do it like this. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not helping anything.
Right.
And I think that's what makes parenting so challenging is balancing that whole soup that I just described. What
Hmm.
was it like for us? How do we think it should be different? What was it like for, our spouse? How do they want it to be different? And then when circumstances hit us, how do we react? And that's where, if I were to sit here and say, most of our conversations that we'd have with therapists come down to all of that. Like,
Right.
how to react to things based upon our past. And I
Exactly.
think that's where, what you bring up as far as coaching and therapy is, it's not that you're walking around every day with this bag of, oh, this is the crap I need to deal with. It's like, oh, when that snowball hits you in the face, how do you react?
Yeah.
Oh, do I have the tools to react appropriately, or do I flip out?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I think that when it comes to our past and all that, I think, yeah, we have the duty, or we have the ability, I should say, we have the ability to change our reaction to things. And
Yeah.
for us as parents, when we become a parent, a father, a mother for the first time, we base how do we raise this child based on our own experiences, right? We have
Yep.
our own
Yep.
experiences that we're dealing with or that we dealt with as a child. So now we've got our own experiences from our own parents. That's going to teach us how to be a parent. And then obviously others around us that are already parents, that will teach us how to be a parent. And then obviously I like to go to the main source, which is the Bible, in my opinion. If
Yeah.
you follow the Bible, it'll teach you how do I be a parent and how do I raise my kids. But
Yeah.
in saying all that, what you had mentioned early on is that sometimes the things that we dealt with in the past from our own parents, we learn from those things and go, that's not going to work for me. That's not how I want my family to be raised, or that's not the values that I want to teach my kids when I have them. Or you say, yeah, my parents they were loving, they were supportive, they did all these things for me. I want my family to be just like that. I was on the other end of the spectrum where my
Yeah.
parents, they weren't involved in anything that I did. I wasn't a bad kid. I got good grades in school and all that. I played sports and all that. But I can count on one hand how many school events they actually came to or sporting events they actually came to. One hand. Because not because they're bad parents, just because they were constantly working. My mom
Yeah.
worked 3 jobs.
Yeah.
So they were constantly gone.
Yeah.
And so I can't fault them for that. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I knew at a very early age I was not going to raise my family that way. And so
Yeah.
I took those lessons that they taught me and went, okay, I'm going the other direction and I'm going to be an all-in dad because I didn't have that all-in dad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we have those experiences to rely on. And truth be told, however, how you decide to raise your kids or be as a dad to your family, you have to be willing and vulnerable to understand the risks or challenges that may come up from the way that you've decided to raise your family or raise your kids. And I think for us, we were talking about apologizing to our kids and saying, I'm sorry, and saying, I'll do better. I just had that experience last night, Tyler. So for parents out there, I've been a dad for a while. I've been a dad for 25 years and I'm still making mistakes today.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
made a mistake last night. My son, I was downloading something on my phone. It was a video from another podcast guest. I was downloading it on my phone so I could send it to my editor. And he happened to be walking by and he just glanced down and said, "What are you doing?" And my initial reaction is like, it's none of your damn business. What do you mean? What am I doing? Like that was my initial thought in my head. So I'm like, I'm downloading a video. Why? Like, like what is it? So
What is
I
it to
didn't
you?
I didn't
Yeah.
mean to respond that way. It was just like, why are you worried about what I'm doing?
Yeah.
So he just went, whoa. All right. He's 23 years old, right? This is a grown man,
Yeah.
right? He's 23 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
He's like, whoa, easy, turbo, right? And he just walked away. And I just let it go. And then I'm thinking, what a jerk. Why did I do that? Like that, there
Yeah.
was no need for me to respond that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I look because I was sitting in the living room. I look and I see that he's in the kitchen. I said, "Hey, bud." And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Hey, I didn't mean to respond to you that way. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
react that way. I know
Yeah.
you were just, he goes, "Oh, no big
Yeah.
deal. Not a big deal." So it took me going, "Hey,
But
man."
it's a big deal because you took ownership. It's not a big deal to him because you've practiced that.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is great is he may have like, yeah, it's not a big deal, but we know that he filed that away. It's like, yeah, okay, dad makes mistakes. He's going to own it. And if he would have like afterwards, that would be a sign of like, oh, you've never taken ownership, right?
Right.
You've never done that. Yeah. You want to
And
hear something?
I didn't want it. I didn't want to have that kind of, there was no need for
Yeah.
it. Like it was
Yeah.
something silly, right? It was something
Yeah.
like, and the way that I reacted was like stupid. So my point is
Yeah.
that Listen, I'm still here trying to be a dad and figure this thing out. And yeah, I've gone through a lot of practice and I've gone through a lot of years of doing this and I've gone through a lot of therapy and I've gone through a lot of podcast guests and I'm still making
Yeah.
mistakes. So I've learned, though, as you just alluded to, I've learned to acknowledge those mistakes. I've learned to
Yeah.
accept them and say, okay, I've got to own this right now in front of my family and
Yep.
I've got to put my tail between my legs and go, you know what? I
Yeah.
messed up and
Yeah.
I'm promised next time I'm gonna try better or do better. So anyways, go ahead
And
with your
that
thought.
makes
Go
you
ahead.
stronger, not weaker.
Absolutely.
I had a podcast guest, and I don't know when we released the podcast, in the fall of 24, right? And her name is Thais Gibson. And she does a lot of attachment theory work, therapy, all that stuff. And this is what she shared with me, and I know it to be true because I've confirmed it with several others, is that 95 to 97% of our actions. Okay. If you were to go make a list of the 100 things that you did interacted with your kids, all right, 95 to 97 of them were subconscious.
Hmm.
95 to 97% of our actions are done subconsciously.
Mhm.
Only 3 to 5% we actually consciously do. You just told a story. You subconsciously reacted to your son.
Mhm.
Oh, snap. I need to consciously take ownership for it. And so one of the amazing things about that, and I think coming back to the vulnerability, is if we understand that 95 to 97% of our actions are subconscious, we have to take ownership for them, whether we intend them or not.
Right.
And here's the amazing thing. This was amazing. This is what she shared with me. The greater majority of those subconscious, um, I would say, wirings
Mhm.
happened before we were 3 years old.
Hmm.
How much do you remember before you were three?
I don't remember a thing before I was 3.
Exactly. And that's what's shocking. But then when it's confirmed, I'm not making this stuff up. This is reality. It's why when you go back to why do I have the people around me to help me? Because you can't see what you're doing.
Right.
I have this training and part of the content that I do. It's called the window in the mirror. Right. And for those of you that are watching this, for example, if Bryan were to have a mirrored look, for example, if you're looking at your screen, say you don't have it mirrored, in the background, podcast would look backwards. You couldn't
Mhm.
read podcast, right?
Right.
The letters would go TSACDOP. Instead, it says PODCAST, right?
Right. It's backwards
That's
for me.
mirrored. Yep, that is mirrored.
Right.
So this is the crazy thing. And I had someone do this because I was putting out content and they're like, hey, Tyler, all of your content, the words are backwards. And they're like, hey, make sure you mirror. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. I apologize for that because I was just used to looking at it mirrored. Well, this is the problem when people tell us, hey, go look in the mirror. Well, you get really used to what you look like. If I were to tell you right now, Bryan, go down to the setting and mirror your video so you see the letters as you see it, you're going to look at that guy and like, who the heck is that guy? I don't like that guy. That guy kind of looks ugly, right? Because you're used to seeing the guy in the mirror. That is not what we look like. We're not perfect mirror images. We are the result of our actions, not our intentions.
Right.
So how do you fix that? There's a purpose of having a mirror so you get a general concept of, all right, is my hair, in line? Do I have something on my face? Do I have something in my teeth? That's what a mirror helps with. But the solution in all relationships, whether that's our spouse, whether our kids, is to look through the window. See, there's no reflection. As you and I are looking at each other, I see Bryan, you see Tyler. And it's me saying, Bryan, what do you see? And that view is what you see now. That may be pretty similar to my mirror, or it may be drastically different. But I have to own both of them. And the moment that I don't own both of them is when I get into a lot of trouble. And what I refer to that as is that is like bugs getting on your windshield. You've driven around plenty of places, especially in California. Start getting those bugs of the spring and the fall, and your window can get plastered. And you need
Mm,
to go to the gas station, clean off your window. You need to make sure you go to the car wash, clean off your window, because the windshield wipers aren't good enough to clean that stuff off.
right.
And what happens in life is if we aren't spending enough time of owning what you see me as through the window, we get a thicker layer of bugs and a thicker layer of bugs and a thicker layer of bugs. And then we get in trouble because then all of a sudden we run into something. We see something, a rock come out of the sky, hits our windshield and cracks our windshield. Now all of a sudden we got a bigger problem. And the worst thing that can happen, the worst case scenario, so all of a sudden our windshield gets so mucked up that we have something that cracks our mirror. That could be losing a job. That could
Mhm.
be your wife saying, hey, I'm walking out. That could be your son or daughter saying, I never want to be around you. That could be, a situation at work where you got caught in doing something that wasn't ethical, whatever it may be. And when your mirror cracks and shatters, that's when you're in trouble.
Mhm.
That's when you come and you fall on your knees. And quite honestly, for a lot of people, that's when they start looking for, something greater, a greater guide. That leads a lot of people to God, right?
Mhm.
It does. But yet, as a friend, we need people that say, hey, how can I help clean your window? Dude, you got some bugs on your window. You need to make sure you clean that up because that is when your window's clean and you can respect your mirror and it doesn't get dirty. Man, that's when we can actually be vulnerable enough to take ownership, to understand, hey, my actions were not intended. Uh-oh, I need to own that, be vulnerable. And that all centers back to why are we doing that in the first place? What's our insecurity? Where does that from?
Mhm.
Is that, for me, this is what's amazing. Amazing. Part of my crux of insecurity is, do I have value? That's it. Am I loved? Do I have value? Do I have worth? When I was 2, I didn't know this till about 2 years ago. Hadn't realized this was a driver. When I was 2, my parents on the farm they ended up getting kicked off of it. And so my older sister and I went to live with my aunt and uncle. I didn't know it. Didn't have any idea. I'm 45. I didn't know till I was like 42 or 43 when my mom told me. Had no clue.
Hmm.
And when I start going through therapy sessions or conversations, and I talk to people about that, and I'm like, oh, could that have an impact on why I'm struggling for my worth and my value? I'm like, absolutely. You didn't understand. Your aunt and uncle loved you. They took care of you, and your parents loved you, and that's why they put you there. But your 2-year-old brain could not rationalize that, and you were essentially given up. You were essentially sent to go live with them, and then you're sitting there. It's like, what do I need to do to have enough value that my parents don't give me up? And it's like, wow, that's pretty dramatic. And yet,
Mhm.
oh, I can either sit here and say, that has no bearing on me, Bryan, or yeah, it probably has an impact. So I got to own it. So it's okay. Doesn't make me any weaker. Doesn't make my parents any more or less. It was a circumstance. Right. How do I choose to own that rather than think that's not a big deal?
And I think the biggest challenge that dads in particular, but this can apply to moms too, is that there's no understanding as to how long it actually takes to recognize how vulnerable we are. There's really no timeline. You have to work at it. It's like your job if you work in, corporate America, or maybe you're
Yeah.
running a business. I mean, you've owned businesses, you've run businesses, you know that it takes a lot of time. And I mean, even let's dumbify it down. You get a puppy. You gotta take a lot of care and
Yeah.
devote a
Yeah.
lot of
It's a
time
lot
to
of
that
work.
puppy. It's a lot of work.
A lot of
Same
work.
thing with recognizing our vulnerability. It's a lot of work. And
Yep.
so for you talking about that story, and thank you for sharing that, for you talking about that story, and for me, recognizing the incident that I had last night with my son, it's like, yeah, we're still working at it. We're still
Yeah.
working at it. We're not going to be perfect. There's nobody perfect. We're going to continue to make
Yeah.
these mistakes. And guess what? Tomorrow, or a month from now, Tyler, or next year from now, Tyler, when my
Yep.
boys are even older, guess what? I'm gonna make another mistake as a dad. I'm gonna
Absolutely.
make another mistake as a
Yep.
husband to my wife. But
Yep.
it's recognizing that, yeah, I can be vulnerable. I can own those things and move forward and try to, as I try to practice every single day, and I've learned this from my own brother-in-law, I try to practice every single day of just getting a little bit better. If I can just be
That's it.
1% better tomorrow than I was today, or if I can be 1% better today than I was yesterday, imagine the compound of that and how much better you'll be over time in a year, 5 years, 10 years from now. So it's just recognizing.
That is the most impactful goal that any person can have. How can I be better today than I was yesterday, working with the intention to be better tomorrow than I am today?
Hmm.
That'll
Yeah.
get you anywhere in life.
Yeah. And
Anywhere.
especially when you're dealing with kids or your spouse,
Yeah.
you have a husband or you
Yeah.
have a wife, whatever the case may be. Tyler, I feel like, I mean, we went on for almost an hour. I feel like we could continue on for another hour, and I may, just because of that, I may have to have you back on
Sure.
for a kind of a part two. But
Yeah.
I
Would love it.
appreciate you, man. I cannot believe, like I said in the beginning, I cannot believe we've been social media friends and friends for so many years, and this is the first time I've had you on. But I'm glad.
It's all
There was
good.
a reason why it took this long,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Good.
appreciate all that you shared, the value that you poured into not only me but my audience as well. For my listeners, viewers want to look you up, learn a little bit more about you. Where's the best place for them to do that?
The best place is YouTube. That's where I share the most content, new podcasts, weekly content shorts. So go to Impact Driven Leader. You can find it at YouTube. You can also check out my website, social media, Tyler Dickerhoof. Look for the bald one. There's like 3 Tyler Dickerhoofs in the world. I'm the bald one. So go check that out, whether it's on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, but the most content that we share with regularity is via YouTube.
All
So,
right, cool. Well, we'll make sure we put that stuff in the show notes. I know for those of you that are watching, listening, he is very active on social media. He's on Instagram's mainly the main feed, but
yeah,
he's very
yeah,
active on social media. So if you have questions, you want to reach out to Tyler. He is, like I said, very active. He's
yeah.
responsive. Unless you ask him a weird question, I'm sure he will respond to
Maybe even then
you.
I might laugh at it if we can have fun with it. But
Yeah.
hey, before you sign off, Brian, I
Yeah.
want to say this. Thank you for doing this.
Oh,
Thank you
thank you.
for being a voice to dads. Thank you for being vulnerable enough to share like the stories that you shared. And I know that isn't just this episode. That's every episode is that you interact with other dads and with other people talking about being a parent. It's people like you that make an impact because you're willing to be vulnerable. You're willing to talk about it. You're willing to say, hey, this needs to be discussed because people deserve to be led better, to have
Mhm.
better parents, to have better coaches, because one part of it may be your biological children, or it may be those kids that you interact with. I've coached for years, and I look at a lot of those relationships are just as important sometimes as my own children, because whether they have a parent that is supporting them or not, hey, some of the people that were most meaningful in my life were coaches, were
Mhm.
mentors, were those people that poured into my life. And so I appreciate you doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, parenting is just one side of it.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
you know, I coached my boys and many other boys and some girls for
Yeah.
20 years. So that was the other side of parenting, right? It was like
Yeah.
I was
It
that
is.
mentor, I was that guide for them. I was that person and you know what? There were a lot of kids that I coached that didn't have the
Yeah.
parental influence or guide that they
Yeah.
needed. And so I was that person that kind of
Yeah.
filled in
Totally.
on a part-time level, but I was that guy that kind of filled in. And guess what? I've gone to weddings from kids that I've coached.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing to see, all the time that you spend with these kids and then they grow up and start to have families of their own. And they still to this day call me coach. To this
Yeah.
day, call me coach.
Well, here's the cool part about that is sometimes we don't even know the impact we have on kids
Mhm.
until they become parents of their own or become coaches and then realize, oh man, why did I love soccer? because the very first coach I had, Gary Freed, was adamant, loved the sport, and he made me love the sport because he appreciated me for playing the sport. And that's when I was 5 years old, right?
Right.
And so it's like, that's the impact that that type of relationship, parenting type relationship, has. And it is magical.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you do, and how you are, not only as a person, but as a husband, as a father. You continue to inspire others. I see it through your social media feed. You continue to inspire others. And if I'm ever up in Spokane, one of these days, I
Let's
promise
go.
I will reach out to you and we'll have to break some bread together. But thank
Awesome.
you very much, Tyler,
Love
for
it.
being on the show. I really, really, really appreciate you being on the
My
show, brother.
pleasure. Thank
Listen,
you.
guys, yeah, this has been another episode of Dad Up. Thank you guys again for being here. Thanks again to my good friend Tyler Dickerhoof. Is that right? Dickerhoof.
Hoof.
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 Dickerhoof.
That's all right.
I always,
It's okay.
I knew I was going to mess it up. But anyways, thanks again to my good friend Tyler for being on the show. Listen, if you want to check him out, reach out to him, learn a little bit more about him, you can do that in the show notes below in the links. Make sure you do that. Make sure you're following him. He's got an awesome podcast as well. Make sure you're following that as well. And, hey, if you're not yet subscribed to my show, please make sure you do that so you don't miss any of the awesome guests that I have on each and every week. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at daduppodcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.